Hey guys, how are you doing? I hope you're all well. It's Mother's Day here in the UK and I am roasting a beef rump joint, what you guys in America call top sirloin. And it's an absolutely massive one. So I hope I'm going to be able to fit it in my skillet. My plan is to season this and then I'm going to show you how I sear it in the skillet on the hob and then finish it in the oven with a probe in. So the first thing to do is to season. Plenty of sea salt. Now with these big bits of meat, any given slice that you eat is only going to have a small amount of the seasoned outside on it. So for that reason, you can be really generous with this seasoning. I mean, you know, you don't want it caked in salt. It doesn't want to be sort of salt baked, but it can be quite a lot because it, you know, when you slice that piece, all the internal stuff is not going to have the salt on it and it's only the outside. So just keep that in mind. I like to use just as natural as possible sea salt. This is Celtic sea salt I'm using. That's my preferred seasoning. I know a lot of people like Redmond and I use that as well. It's really good. Some people like the Maldon salt. I would say that the size of the granule or flake, the grain or the flake of salt is important. I prefer to use something that's on the finer side, not necessarily ground really fine, but on the finer side. Why? Because it sticks to the meat more readily. It doesn't fall off so much. If I'm using a really coarse ground Celtic sea salt, those big granules can fall off more easily and then I'm losing seasoning. So, you know, I'm kind of hedging my bets by using a finer salt. More of it's going to adhere to the crust. I'm going to get a more even seasoning. Now, normally when we cook meat in a skillet, we're going to get the skillet hot, get fat into the skillet, get the fat hot, and then put the meat in. Let the meat cook in fat rather than directly in contact with the metal. I'm going to do this slightly differently. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to render out some of the fat cap of this rump joint, this top sirloin. I'm going to render some of the fat cap down in the skillet and then turn the meat over in order to sear the rest of the joint in its own fat. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it fat side down into a cold skillet and then I'm going to put that on high heat and just let the skillet heat up, the fat heat up, the fat render out, and then turn it over. So because this is such a massive piece of meat, I'm not sure how easy it's going to be to do this, but you know, I'm going to give it a go. Now, if you don't have a massive 30cm skillet or you just don't want to do it this way, don't worry. Crank your oven up as hot as it will go, stick the meat in, season just salt into the oven, hot. Give it, for a big one like this, about 20 minutes in your hottest oven, and take it out, turn the oven down low. You're just using that hot oven to effectively get a sear to form a crust. I prefer the crispness that I get from searing in fat, so I'm going to try to do this way, but sometimes with a joint of meat and the angular nature of the joint, for example like a bone-in rib with all those bones coming off, you're not going to be able to do that in a skillet so easily. You can do it to, you know, up to a point, but the bones get in the way. So either, you know, you can take those bones off and do it as a ribeye joint, which works great searing in the skillet, or we can sear it in a hot oven. But anyway, I'm going to show you this and let's see what happens. So onto the hob and heat on. And then we're just going to leave it, and press it down, make sure it's making good contact, and just leave it in there to start rendering some of that fat. I can always add some fat if I don't get enough, if I don't get the quantity that I want from it. But let's see what we can do with this approach. Got a roasting rack in here which I was storing the meat on. And the reason for storing it on the rack is so that it doesn't discolor where it's making contact with the surface of something else. You know, you get the liquid coming out of the meat, pooling, and then it goes kind of brown, which I don't like. So I store it on the rack. And what we're now going to do is just sweep the salt out of this from where I seasoned it. I've got enough seasoning on there. I'm going to roast my meat in this dish. I don't want a load more salt that's all fallen off, pulled in there, because it could get too much. I don't need to wash it because we're about to cook in it. So I'm just going to give it a wipe. And we'll definitely roast it on the rack because that will allow more air to circulate all the way around it. Now I can hear that fat cap starting to sizzle quite a lot in that skillet. I don't want to burn it. I want to be able to keep it on that side long enough for fats to render out in order to give me a good pool of tallow to then turn over and sear the other side. So I'm going to turn it down a little bit because we want to keep it going for enough time. Now while that's going on, let's just prep a couple of little things. I've got some rosemary here. This is just fresh rosemary straight off the plant. If you buy it from the supermarket, do wash it because it's bound to be sprayed with something or other. Big rosemary leaves are a slightly odd texture I find on a piece of meat, so I always want to chop it as finely as I can, but I don't want to use dried rosemary. For me, I want the oils that you get from the fresh rosemary. There we go, finely chopped rosemary, and what we're going to do is when the meat is seared, I'm going to put that rosemary over the meat and then we'll put it in the oven to finish off. I'm not putting it on before the searing phase because it will burn in the pan. We'll keep that to one side. Now I've got some lovely organic woodland mushrooms here. I'm just going to take any stalks off and chop those. Okay, so I've got my rosemary, my mushrooms and some asparagus. I'm just going to check the meat. I can already see some tallow underneath. Let's make sure that we're not getting too hot on this side. Yeah, it's looking good. It's golden. It's just getting to a point where it might start to burn. And I've got a good depth of fat there, so I'm going to turn this over. I'll turn the heat up. Turn it over. Tuck it in. Looking good. It's clearly too big for this skillet, but needs must. I've just turned the beef and I'm going to show you what we do with this asparagus. Okay, so stop these bands around it, we'll take off. The first thing to do is we want to remove the woodier part of the stalk. And the way to do that is just to take the stalk end and the other end and just snap it. And it will snap off at the point where it begins to get woody. So you can just do that gently and they will snap in exactly the right place for you. There we go. As you can see, they are slightly different lengths. So a chef would line the tips up and then chop the ends off. I'm not going to do that. It's a waste of food, okay? We're not doing fine dining. It doesn't need to look beautiful. What we are going to do, however, is just very gently use this peeler to just take some of the thicker bits, these little triangular kind of leaves, if you like, from the outside of the stalk. I'm just going to clean them off. Just see how we're doing. I can probably turn that down a bit again because the heat that the pan will have lost by me turning the colder side of the meat onto the pan surface, that will now have been replaced by the flame. Okay, so here we've got our beautiful mushrooms, our prepped asparagus, and I'm just going to chop some flat leaf parsley. Again, I've washed it very thoroughly because it is from the supermarket. Flat leaf parsley, which I'm going to use to garnish this. Now, one other thing, a clove of garlic. I just need one. I don't need to chop it up. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to smush it like that. It's going to go into my pan when I pan fry these vegetables just to add a hint of flavour. So, that can stay there. Let's check on the beef. Oh yes, look at that. Lovely crisp crust formed. Now I'm just going to try and get the edges of it. It's so massive. It's ridiculous. The leaning tower of pizza. Try and get that edge. It's all I can do not to pull all these crisp bits off and start eating them, but I think we'll try to just wait until, you know, everyone else has a chance to get involved as well. It is Mother's Day. Go this edge. Whoa. Amazing. Okay, so this is done, and it's super simple. All we need to do is just put it fat side up, whoa, back into the tray, and we need to sprinkle over. Look at that, looks tasty. Get the pan out of the way. Just sprinkle over our rosemary like this. Look how beautiful it looks. Okay, so here's our seared meat in the tray. I've scattered the rosemary over the top. I've put my probe in, and we're going to take this up to 40 degrees, 105 centigrade, 105 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to do that in a kind of medium-low oven, and it's going to slowly come up to 40 degrees, and then we're going to rest it. And while it rests, it's just going to continue to cook up to medium rare. So I'm going to put that in now. Okay, this is done. Look at this. It's looking utterly awesome. Lovely colour on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this rest now. It's still only at 40 degrees centigrade internal, which is 105 Fahrenheit, so it's very raw in the middle there. What we're going to do is we're just going to let it sit, and it will gradually finish cooking. A big piece of meat like this, at least 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes is going to be smarter. I'm going to very loosely tent it in foil, and we'll just let it rest. All righty-ho, so our meat is resting under here. It has come up, I've just checked the probe, it's come up to 51 now, and it'll probably come up another couple of degrees, so it's that nice kind of rare, medium rare kind of thing. I'm just going to leave that, and I've got this small red onion. I'm just going to chop that, take the end off, cut it in half, take off the outer layer, and then all we need, we don't need a lot of this, all we're going to do, just make a little space, is just do some very thin rounds. It just adds a little savoury hint of sweetness to the pan. Here we go, so this is foaming nicely. In a non-stick pan like this, silicone or a wooden spoon. Don't use metal utensils. So let's put the onions and the mushrooms in. And we're going to add this garlic clove. It's still got the skin on, doesn't matter, it's all good. Just going to add a little bit of flavour. And we need to season these. Plenty of sea salt. Let's just get those nicely coated in the butter. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put half or maybe 3/4 of the parsley in, and I want that to go crisp. The reason I am not putting it all in is because it's nice to have a little bit at the end to garnish. Now I'm going to pop these asparagus in like this, and I'm going to turn the heat down and cover, and I'm going to let them steam on top of those mushrooms. Okay, let's see how it's going. And these mushrooms are getting some beautiful colour on here. Look at that. I'm going to be a little careful that they don't go too far, but they're looking lovely. And what we want to do is just check that our asparagus is just the right consistency. It can go a tiny bit more, it's still a tiny bit firm. I think it's going to be absolutely perfect, because just as those mushrooms are finishing off, I can take my garlic clove out now, it's done its job. Just let this finish off. I'll tell you a really lovely thing to do is just to grate a little lemon zest over this at the last minute, but I actually don't have any. So we're just going to go with it like this. Yeah, it's great. Let's get it off. Look at this. Beautiful, rare roast beef. And it's well rested. So all of this moisture has stayed inside. We can just carve it in some thin slices like this. Top sirloin, rump, and asparagus with wild mushrooms. Give it a go. If you make it, take a photo, put it on Instagram, tag me at Ruston's Boneyard. Thanks you guys. Have a good day. Bye.